this video, I'm going to walk through the code needed to make this map of homicides in downtown Atlanta in 2019. This is a very simple map, and there are lots of things we could do to improve it, but we can use it to illustrate the process of creating a map in R. Don't worry if you don't understand all the code in this video, we'll go through it all in more detail in future tutorials. I've already opened RStudio. Your RStudio might look slightly different from this one, but that won't affect how it works. The first thing I'm going to do is open a new R script file that I can use to store the code for my map. I do that by clicking on the new file icon and then R script. Storing my code in a script file means I can save it and easily reuse the code later if I want to. The first thing I'm going to do in almost any R script is to load the R packages that I'm going to need. Packages load extra R functions that we can use for specific tasks. In this case, we'll need the GG spatial package to create some of the layers on the map, the SF package for handling the locations of each crime, and the tidyverse package for various data management tasks. You can see that when I load these packages, some messages appear in the RStudio console. We'll cover these messages in a later tutorial, but you don't need to worry about them for now. The next thing I need to do is load the crime data that we want to show on the map. This data is stored online in a comma-separated values or CSV file, which we can load with the readCSV function. You can tell that readCSV is a function because the name readCSV is followed by parentheses, which in this case include the location of the file that we're opening. Now we're going to store the data we've loaded into an object called homicides. Storing data in an object means we can use it again later. This code here, the arrow pointing to the left, means put the result of the function on the right hand side into the object on the left hand side. So it's a way of saving the result of a function in an object. So once we've run that line of code, just to check what the data looks like, we can view the first few rows of the data using the head function. And we can see that the data contains 4 columns, each containing a different piece of information about each crime. The longitude and latitude columns contain numbers. But at the moment, R doesn't know what those numbers represent. In order to make use of those numbers as locations, we need to tell R that those numbers represent points on the surface of the Earth. And we can do that using the STASSF function. STASSF converts the data to a type of object that understands that those numbers in the longitude and latitude columns represent locations on the Earth's surface. That's important because it means we can do things like calculate distances between locations or identify whether a point is inside a particular area or not. We'll cover this function in more detail in a future tutorial, so I won't explain how it works now. And once we've run that line of code, we can go back to the RStudio console and use the head function again to look at the first few rows. And we can see that this new object called homicides SF looks very similar to the previous one, but there is now a new column called geometry, and we can also see a message above the data giving us some information about the dataset as a whole. And those differences confirm that we've successfully changed the data so it's now in a format that R understands represents geographic locations. There is one final step in preparing the data before we can use it to make a map. In this step, we transform the coordinates so that they are easier to map. I won't go into why this is important because we'll cover it in a future tutorial. Now that we've loaded and wrangled the crime data, we're ready to plot it on a map. Maps are made up of layers that we add in the order we want them to appear, a bit like building a house from the ground up. The first step in making a map is to create a blank map object that we can add all the layers to. We create this blank map with the ggplot function. When we run this line of code, you can see that a grey rectangle has appeared in the plots panel in RStudio. That is a plot. It's a map, but it's completely blank because we haven't added any data to it yet. So our next step is to add layers to show the data that we want. The first layer of data we will add to the map is a base map, which shows streets and other features of the landscape of the area we're interested in. Base maps are really useful because they mean we can see the physical context that crimes happen in. The next 2 layers we're going to add to the map are a layer of points marking the locations of each homicide, and a layer of labels, one for each point, giving information about each crime. And I've used 2 functions to load those layers, GeomeSF and GeomeSF label, and in each case I've specified some settings to control the appearance of those layers on the map, and we'll cover those settings in more detail later on. Now we've added these data layers, we can see when we run the code that our map is starting to take shape. So we've now got a map that shows the data, but there are a few changes that we can make to make the map clearer. Firstly, we can expand the area covered by the map to give a bit more space for the labels. To do this, we use the expansion function, which we'll learn more about in a future tutorial. Then we can add a title and the necessary attribution statement for the data we're using. And finally, we can remove unnecessary elements from the map to make it clearer. So that's things like the axis labels. And we can do that by setting the map theme using the theme void function. And if we run that code, we'll see that our final map appears. Now, there's still a lot we could do to improve this map in various ways, and we'll do that in future tutorials. But we do now have a basic map showing the locations of homicides that occurred in downtown Atlanta in 2019. Remember that this is a quick walkthrough of what creating a crime map in R looks like, so don't worry if you don't understand everything quite yet. We'll look at all the functions shown in this video in more detail in future.